Our second cybersecurity keynote speaker needs no introduction. He is an innovative, visionary executive and turnaround expert with 3 decades in senior management, including CEO of 5 companies, CIO of the fourth largest data center in the federal government, and has served on 12 board of directors. Pleased to welcome Jack Blount, President and CEO at Intrusion, as he shares his take on what it takes to fight the war on cybercrime. Over to you, Jack. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. So I wanted to talk to you about winning the war on cybercrime. I do believe it's a war, and I do believe it is escalating rapidly. So I'll try and share some data with you today that hopefully helps you address this war. Just to share briefly my experience, I know I was given a little bit of an introduction, but I have been working in computer security for over 40 years. My first product at IBM was a product called RACF, which was an authentication, the first authentication product on an IBM mainframe. So I have been in this space for a long, long time and seen a lot of evil going on. I've served as a CEO, a CIO, a CTO of several public companies. I was recruited 9 years ago after a major breach of the federal government that they say cost them over $300 million by the president to come in and try and help them address their cyber warfare issues. As a result, I ended up spending 4 years as the CIO on cyber warfare for the federal government, and I addressed 50,000 attacks per day, 24/7, 365 for 4 years and never let up. And I'm sure that was 9 years ago. I'm sure that 50,000 number is probably 10 times that today. I really hate to think how many they get today, but I'm sure it's outrageous. What is cybercrime? Well, that's the first thing we need to understand. You have to know your enemy if you're going to win the war. The enemy is not a college student trying to impress everybody with how smart they are, which is how hackers started out 20 years ago. Today, it is shifted into what we call cyber warfare. It is largely run by nation states and major organized crime. So it's big, big, big business. There's billions of dollars being spent on cyber warfare today, not millions. A couple of points I would bring to your attention is that ransomware is in the news constantly. It's seen as a massive attack. It's seen as stealing trillions of dollars out of the world economy last year alone. And most of the ransomware actually comes out of Russia. It's pretty easy to track it back, whether it's an attack on the federal government or whether it's an attack on a business in another country. Most of the ransomware is actually written and driven by Russian attackers. Now, on the other hand, where the most damage is really done, we hear a lot less about, is stolen intellectual property. Most stolen intellectual property is being driven by China. They are the experts at this. They will steal your IP. They will design your product. They will ship your product before you get through making it, and they'll sell it for half what you intended to sell it for, literally putting companies out of business before they ever launch their product. So the theft of intellectual property is the greatest harm. And I almost hesitate to say this because it scares people, but reports are that about 90% of intellectual property goes unidentified and unreported by businesses. It's done in the background on the stealth. You don't even know what you lost. This is the newest and most deadly form of cyber warfare, is intellectual property theft. So I would caution you to do a lot of the things I talk about in this presentation to be for sure you're prepared for that. See if we can get to the next slide. All of a sudden, we're not advancing. It's weird. There we go. Leaders in cybercrime is primarily China. They are the masters at this. And I think it's appropriate that a Chinese general, Sun Tzu, once said, know thy enemy. I think that's the most important thing to winning the war on cybercrime, is to understand who the enemy is, how sophisticated they are, and how they attack you. When we talk about China, they are literally spending billions of dollars on cyber warfare every day. The president of China has said many times in many different events that he plans to use AI to rule the world someday. So China is working very, very hard with AI as a warfare mechanism. While the U.S. leads AI and is in the news all the time about healthcare things, medicine, automation, self-driving cars, there's certainly many areas that I think America is one of the leading countries of AI technology today. But what I want to point out to you today is that there is no question in my mind. I have done business in China for over 20 years. I have been there many, many times. I actually worked out of China for over 6 months. I have a lot of experience hands-on in China. I have visited with many of their senior executives. I have visited with many of their companies. And I can tell you my opinion, China leads artificial intelligence warfare around the world. Crime, encryption, the technologies that they can use to win cyber warfare, they are way ahead of the U.S. on, in my opinion. It concerns me greatly. I raise this issue to the American government every time I get an opportunity to fly to D.C. and talk to anybody about this. Today, cyber warfare is sophisticated AI algorithms that have been written by PhDs in computer science that are being run on massive supercomputers that literally algorithmically attack every active IP address on the internet around the world every second of every day. Cyber warfare has dramatically changed. It's why we've seen the number of breaches escalate from thousands to millions a year. The two things that I learned when I was a federal CIO that shocked me the most, the first was how fast an attack that you successfully block would reattack within 3 to 5 minutes with a new algorithm. That's when it first became obvious to me that these are not people on keyboards that are driving the cyber warfare attacks. This is a computer. A computer is the only thing that could modify its algorithm and reattack you halfway around the world within 3 to 5 minutes with a modified algorithm. And they will do this endlessly. They don't eat lunch. They don't take breaks. They don't have to sleep at night. 24/7, those algorithms are hitting your site over and over and over until they finally successfully get through. It is a completely new form of warfare. The other thing that really shocked me was how many of these attacks either came from brand new IP addresses, which you could know nothing about, which is where most zero-day attacks come from, of course. But even worse, they come from very sophisticated, modified, compromised IP addresses that will show up as registered as IBM, Google, a State Department, or some other trusted, recognizable entity. That's what I learned in the first few months when I took over as CIO of the federal government, is the attacks were not what I'd seen in business, not what I was used to, far more sophisticated, far more effective. So I caution you to be very aware of the order of magnitude of the change of the attacks. That's why we see websites with screens like this. This is obviously a public website around the world. You can get it. There's all kinds of different views of it. And they point out the largest breaches and hacks, and this updates daily. And the reality is it's in the thousands and thousands of attacks. It's endless. Some of the things that I think we need to recognize is I don't think there's a business that hasn't been successfully breached by attacks. Microsoft has been breached many times, for example. Facebook has been breached. Marriott Hotels has been breached. Every bank that I have researched in the world at one point or another in the last 18 months was successfully breached by a cyber attack. So banks are not safe. Financial agencies are not safe. So the problem is orders of magnitude worse than you realize, because most people do not report their cyber breaches because it hurts their reputation, it hurts their company, and therefore they would rather keep it quiet than make the world aware of how bad the problem truly is. Again, these are sophisticated attacks. Most recently, excuse me, we all saw the sunburst attack, sometimes called the solar winds attack, sometimes called the fire eye attack, whatever name you want to use for it. This started out over a year ago as a zero-day attack. They successfully breached the SolarWinds company by design. This was not by accident. This was a deliberate, focused, orchestrated, sophisticated attack on SolarWinds, because they saw SolarWinds as a network company with hundreds of thousands of customers around the world, many, many government agencies around the world that were using their network technology product. They stole the code to one of SolarWinds' key products. They made modifications to the code. They reimplanted those modifications into the SolarWinds database. And when SolarWinds then updated to all their customers worldwide, that penetration was impregnated in every customer they had. SolarWinds has openly admitted that more than 18,000 businesses around the world were breached by this very single sunburst attack. 16 federal government agencies in the U.S. alone, including the Pentagon, including the Treasury, have admitted they were successfully penetrated by this SolarWinds attack. I believe that once the dust settles, there will probably be over 100,000 businesses that were successfully breached by this one single attack. This is the state of warfare today. This is not an exception that'll never happen again. This is the new norm. That's what I want to make you aware of today. That's what I want to get you alerted to and upgrading your defenses, because no one's defenses are sufficient today to protect them from this kind of sophisticated, funded, AI-driven, supercomputer-powered attack on your network. Nobody is set up today to defend against that. Let's look at some of the reasons. It takes years for normal security to clean up an infection like this. Again, today they think there's 18,000 businesses. I think it's closer to 100,000 businesses. But when China or Russia attack your network as a nation state, the first thing they do is they deposit hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny silent agents that live on your network that will begin to attack you in an algorithmic program over time, endlessly, as part of a campaign of where they call home, download additional resources, and do additional damage to their company. It may take weeks, it may take months, it might take even years. When I was in the government, we would see some of these attacks where the agents were literally programmed not to reattack for an entire year, so that they could sit silently on your network, completely let you get your guard down, and then reattack when you least expect it. They have become extremely sophisticated. This is not an accident. This is not a lucky draw that some computer kid hacked into your network last night. This is an orchestrated, planned, sophisticated effort that's going on to damage business around the world. There's three major myths that I like to point out when I talk to people. The first myth that drives me crazy is how naive the world is to believe that firewalls stop cybercrime effectively. It's simply not true. Let's look at the truth. The truth is 100% of the companies, which are in the hundreds of thousands, who have been successfully breached in the last 3 years, had a firewall in place, in production, properly configured that provided zero defenses against the attack they faced. The simple truth is firewalls cannot by themselves stop cybercrime. Next big myth that I hear over and over is if I buy my hardware and software from a trusted vendor like Apple or Dell, that it's going to be free of malware. When I was in the federal government, through a combined effort with the CIA, we went out and bought over 100 computers, all of them manufactured in China, all of them sold under different brand names, from Apple to Dell to you name it, and we investigated those. A few years later, Bloomberg learned somehow about the study I had done and did their own study. So in 2018, they repeated this. They went out and bought all new computers straight from manufacturers, shipped out of China, and every computer they bought and tested had malware installed on it when they bought it. So if you've bought a new computer and put it on your network in the last 5 years, I can guarantee your network is infected with malware because you installed it with your new systems and you don't even know it's there. Lastly is I hear over and over from CIOs, CISOs, CTOs, my network is clean and free from malware because I use a layered architecture to defend against cybersecurity and have several products in use. And layered architecture is certainly better than a non-layered architecture. When I was in the government, I put in a 10-layer architecture. But it also cost me over $20 million a year to install, maintain, and support, and most businesses can't afford those kind of defenses. What is the truth of the matter? The truth of the matter is your network today has hundreds, if not thousands, of cybercrime agents silently living on your network right now that are doing call homes, that are exfilling data, that are working against you. I make this bet to every prospect that our salespeople bring in. If I can install my new solution, Shield, on your network, and in 5 minutes after I take it out of the box, if I can identify 50 malware agents that I found and killed living on your network, I'll pay you $500. I've been doing this for several months now. I haven't paid anybody $500 yet. I've never found a network in the government or in business that isn't highly infected with silent malware agents living on their network that they have simply no idea are there. It takes new AI technology to identify these agents that are living on your network. How do you win the war then? You have to know the enemy and you have to be prepared. If you know the enemy is this sophisticated and you know the enemy is attacking every IP address in the world, and you know the enemy is driven by supercomputers, then you've got to get very aggressive and smart about what you do. The first thing I did when I went into the government 9 years ago, I was shocked to find out that most of the data the federal government was storing and using was neither encrypted and in many cases not even backed up. So I put a program in place to literally make sure that everything was on automated backup with a very sophisticated approach to how it was done, and every data file that the federal government used was encrypted data. If your data is encrypted, that is your number one best defense against ransomware, against exfil of data, against all of the malware attacks that are out there. I don't know anybody that is successfully breaching encrypted data. So that is your best and safest defense. It may take a little bit of time. It may cost you a little bit of money, but no business can afford to have unencrypted data that they're using. And you have to have a very sophisticated approach. Yet what it's reported regularly is less than 40% of even critical data is actually encrypted today. Stop and think for a second. How much data, how many customer lists, How much source code? How many other things do you have in your network today that you know are not encrypted? Realize that your network has artificial intelligence agents living on it today, learning about your network, learning about your processes. And we have seen extremely sophisticated attacks. One of the companies that I came in to help had 7 levels of backups that they did on a time-based basis. So at any one moment, they had 7 different levels stored in different places of backups. So they thought they were absolutely safe, yet they got breached. That's why I got called in. The algorithm that had been living on their network understood their backup, understood their algorithms, and sat there and worked patiently weeks and months until all 7 levels of backup data were all encrypted. And that's when it hit you with ransomware and took you out, because now you got no place to restore from. The enemy is that smart. They are that sophisticated. It's fairly easy to write an AI agent that can live on your network and monitor your passwords, monitor your backup cycle, and figure this stuff out, and therefore effectively attack you. You have to realize that is going on. You have to realize the nature of warfare in cybercrime today. I say that everybody has to use a 4-layer architecture at a minimum. The first layer, I say, has to include a database of the internet that has already identified all of the malware sites that are on the network. For example, we can tell you, few people in the world can, that there are 3.4 billion active bad malware IP addresses in use on the internet while I'm giving you this presentation. Most companies will give you numbers in the 300 to 500,000 range. We identify from a 25-year-old database that we have been building and collecting that there are literally 3.4 billion cybercrime IP addresses active on the internet today. If you don't know that, you are defenseless. You will be breached. Number 2, you have to have a layer that uses real-time AI to open and inspect every packet of data attempting to enter or exit your network. And please realize malware works on the premise that once they get on your network, they are assumed trusted and they can call out to any place they want in the world successfully and download anything they want successfully. So it is a flaw in the design of network architecture that if you're inside a network, you're assumed to be safe. Realize that's how and they easily attack you. Third layer needs to have an AI agent that can not just identify, but can actually kill every malware connection in real time on your network. On average, we see most customers that we have, we kill over 1.5 million call homes a month in the average normal business, in their normal operations. That's all malware trying to exfil data, trying to download encryption algorithms to encrypt for ransomware and do other types of malware toward you. If you're not able to real time identify and kill all of these connections, you are being breached. And fourth, again, real-time AI to identify and kill zero-day attacks. Everybody thinks zero-day attacks cannot be stopped. We are confident they can be stopped. We stop them every day of every week by the thousands in every one of our customers. We stopped the SolarWinds breach last March. I don't think most people in the world knew the SolarWinds breach existed until November or December last year. We did not know that we were killing the SolarWinds breach because we didn't know what the SolarWinds breach was. Our AI identified it as dangerous, and therefore we killed the connections and never let them happen. Through reviewing our database, once we learned about the SolarWinds breach, we were able to identify we had been blocking it since last March. That's how real-time AI can identify and effectively kill zero-day attacks. Now, I'm not going to tell you we can kill 100% of them because technology changes every day, but we certainly believe and we can prove that we kill most of them and possibly even all of them. Another myth that I should have put under myths is alerts are not effective defenses. Every cybersecurity product, the 800 to 2,000, depending on which research you trust, of cybersecurity products in the marketplace, fundamentally what all of them do is they generate alerts, thousands of alerts, sometimes hundreds of thousands of alerts. There's fundamentally just too many alerts to research and defeat them. Again, 9 years ago in the federal government, I was receiving over 50,000 a day, every single day. If you calculate the manpower in IT engineers to identify, research, and defeat 50,000 alerts a day, you have to have over 1,000 IT professionals working 24/7, and no company can afford that. Once malware has infected your network, it's almost impossible to identify and remove it. Therefore, those alerts are providing you no defense. They're simply too little, too late to protect you. The only defense that works against malware today is real-time AI-based activity that can identify these malware agents and kill them. You need a solution that can kill the alerts before it can call home, before it can hurt you. That is the secret to winning the war and not being overwhelmed. Together, we believe we can win the war on cyber crime. I'm sure you've all seen the numbers. Over $3 trillion were lost in identifiable losses to cybercrime last year alone. $3 trillion. And the estimates right now are that it's going to exceed $6 trillion in losses to cybercrime. Please understand how sophisticated the enemy is. When I was in the government, we've worked to stop one of these agents. After months and months of work and thousands of man hours, we were able to identify the source. We were able to go after them and shut them down. And the most shocking thing that we found out in that is that that organization was spending $100 million a year in R&D to write malware agents to attack your business. These are very well funded, very sophisticated warfare agents. They are not just the next attack. With that, I want to thank you very much for your time. I think we have a few minutes. I have a clock in front of me. I guess we've got a sponsor that can say if we have any time left. If we do have time, I'll be glad to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's a pleasure to meet you. We do not have enough time, but for everyone who just heard Jack Blount, the president and CEO of Intrusion, can drop any questions or any concerns you have on the live chat box, or you can also visit Intrusion's booth to know more about the disruptive and innovative solutions they have to offer. So thank you so much, Jack. Pleasure to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you for having me today.